panelists, welcome back for the afternoon components of today's Berlin International Economics Congress. Very happy and also honored to have the chance to introduce our first keynote speaker of the afternoon, Mr. José António Pinto Ribeiro. I'll say a few words about his very extensive biography, which I probably will not succeed in doing justice to him, because it's quite an extensive bibliography. So we tried to pull at least some of the highlights, but I think in the context of his lecture, you will also learn even more. Mr. José António Pinto Ribeiro received his degree of law from the University of Lisbon in 1969. He was also awarded the Gulbenkian Prize for being the best student in legal and economic sciences. He has a highly impressive career, including roles as a lawyer, a legal advisor, a professor of law at the University of Lisbon, company chairman. And I'll fast forward a little bit. In December 2009, he was elected by the Portuguese Parliament to the position of Member of High Council of the Public Prosecutor's Office, a position he held until December 2011. From 2008 until 2010, he served as the Minister of Culture. So really someone who has direct experience in terms of really innovating and also executing cultural diplomacy in practice. He's long been involved in social issues. He was actually the founding member of the first civil rights organization in all of Portugal, Forum Justice and Liberty. Or Forum Justica e Liberdades in Portuguese, which seeks primarily to study, promote, and defend civil rights in Portugal. So again, a man of action, not only a man of words. He's really done a lot in Portugal in terms of civil rights, in terms of cultural diplomacy, and also in terms of law. So for many reasons, I'm very, very happy and also highly honored to have the chance to welcome you here in person, and we're very much looking forward to your keynote address. If you could please join me in a very, very warm welcome for Mr. José António Pinto Ribeiro. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to start by thanking the ICD, the Institute for Cultural Diplomacy, and its Executive Director, Mr. Marc Donfrey, for the invitation to speak today before you and such a distinguished audience. I will try to strict my position to the 30 minutes I was asked to use and address you, and then I will answer whatever questions you would like to raise. In my opinion, the moment we are currently facing is particularly challenging, requiring lucidity and strict imagination to understand the world's problems and find new and different solutions for them. For this, we have to come together and discuss who we are, what we want, and where we are going. This is exactly what the ICD does, and this is the opportunity we have before us. The topic I will be addressing here is, in some sort, a topic of back to basics. The starting point I want to call your attention to is that there is no culture without language, and that the identity of cultures distinguishes itself one from the others, and asserts itself grounded on the different languages from which they originate. Culture begins in language, because that is where thinking begins. In the beginning was the Word, as the King James Bible says, John 1:13. Things we cannot name, we cannot think about. As Bonald, a French investigator on philology, stated, "L'homme ne peut penser sans penser sa parole." Man may not think his word without, may not think his word, his thought. Man may not think his thought without thinking his word. It is through language that we free ourselves from the condition as animals. Language is what enables us to think and be human. And this is why we assert that our true creation is through the verb, through our own verb, the verb set by us. That is where thinking and reasoning begins. That is our human beginning. But if language is the beginning of humanity, our memory and our freedom as humans really begins when we discovered writing. And this is what took us, and we correctly describe today, from history, from prehistory to history. Before writing and subsequent perennial narrative and literature, there was no history. It is through the literature of the writings of others that we free ourselves from the circumstances of place and time. in which we are born. It is through access to these writings that we can become the condensation of all that humanity was before us. As someone knowingly wrote, reading is walking. It is through reading that we move. Writing and reading, what has been written by others, is freedom of time and space. It is through reading that I free myself from my condition as a living person, as a being, a spatially and temporally finite being. Each of us lives here and now in a certain space, in a certain time. Through reading what others before us wrote, we free them from their deaths, and we become their contemporaries. Through writings that others will read, I will free myself from death and will remain alive as long as my writings will be read. I will be freed from my finitude of space and time. Reading is learning, and those who learn to read well learn to learn well. They have a means of instruction, of knowledge of others, of all others. They can be a creation point and support for cultural bridges between distant people. Thus, the quicker, the better we can read, the better and the quicker we can learn. We will learn about being human. We can free ourselves from our bodies, and if nothing that is human is foreign to me, I can therefore also know myself, free myself from my finitude. Through reading, I can become a citizen of the world and establish relations with others that are far away from me, far in space and far in time. In order to build cultural bridges between people and countries, everyone needs to have access to culture. Yet, for this, it is essential that everyone be taught to read and write. But to do so, I must know how to read and write in a language in which everything is written, a language in which is physical, either it is physical or virtual. There are libraries, and there is possible to read whatever novel, whatever report, whatever written document, from the Bible to the Quran, from the Civil Code to the constitutions, to newspapers, to radio and television, as well as movie subtitles. This is the first condition of cultural diplomacy, that people have access to a written language that gives them access to other cultures in which one's own culture exists and can be also disseminated. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to delve a little bit further and highlight the fact that reading is not only knowing the content of what one reads, but perhaps and most of all, it is learning to make a narrative. Learning to build a narrative about oneself and about others. That is how we create identity, individual and collective identity. The entire tributary cultural history of Greco-Roman culture, I would say of all Western culture, is grounded on the construction of the identity of individuals based on individual human adventure and on the narrative of that individual adventure. The culture is grounded mostly on the construction of an identity based on the elaboration of a narrative on each one of us. First for ourselves, and then this narrative is brought to others. Our identity is that narrative that we build about ourselves, about where we come from, about where we are going, about what we did and were, about what we do and are, what we will do and what we will be. From Homer to Coetzee, from Dante to Dostoevsky, from Cervantes to Joyce, from Shakespeare to Jan Voss, from Goethe to Thomas Mann, from Flaubert to Tolstoy, from Kafka to Saramago, from Borges to Garcia Marquez, from Steinbeck to Javier Marias, from Kundera to Pessoa, everything is narrative, individual and collective narrative. And this is the instrument for the creation of our own individual identity through narrative. The models of life of each one of us, of each individual, are, in the first place, the subconscious models of imago, induced by the family circle, by father and mother, and by others close to us. Besides these subconscious models, also strongly impacting us are the very conscious images of what our parents and our elders expect and want for us. The life projects in which they expressly place their hopes, which they tell us in so many ways and words to follow. But besides these models, and most important, because they are the ones that make us free, are the models of life that we ourselves build, representing what we want to do, what we want to be. Models that, to be built as self-determination models, require culture. That is, the knowledge of the world beyond the narrow and immediate circle of our family life, of our closest social circle. Until the end of the 19th century, it was through reading other narratives that we essentially discovered these other models. It was, and still is, from reading the narratives of others that we learn to formulate our own narrative project. Now we have other ways to discover role models. We have ways of recording and preserving sound and image, music, film, television, and the internet, the digital world. But through old or new languages and ways, only by creating our own narrative will we build an awareness of self, of one's own individuality. The famous neuroscientist António Damasio made us recently aware that every thinking brain is obsessively narrative. If the brain is not narrative, he is not thinking and he has no identity. Speaking, reading and writing is talking and writing about freedom, about identity, about creativity, about the responsibility of being able to build ourselves. It is talking about history and humanity. And it is handling the true and essential tools to build the history of each and every one of us, the identity of each and every one of us, and also the humanity of each and every one of us. I told you before that reading well is learning well. Let me remember you Basil Bernstein, a British social psychiatrist who made extensive research about language and social origin, to conclude only that the lesser and poorer the verbal expression capacity, the more frequent was the recourse to violence in matrimonial relations. If we cannot be competently human in expressing ourselves, we easily regress to animal violence. This is why it is crucial that diplomacy sets up programs to give access and for people to have access to basic tools that provide access to culture. Programs to mobilize people, to teach, and others to learn how to read and write. Eradicating and fighting illiteracy and functional illiteracy is the most important task of diplomacy, supporting economic and social development, and is core to cultural diplomacy. But it is not enough to know how to read and write. It is necessary to know how to read and write very well a language that can be a vehicle. If the mother language is a local language without minimal relevant written expression, it is absolutely necessary and essential that those persons, those people, learn a second language. That is one of those languages in which everything is available. In June 1940, when France was being defeated by the Nazi German army, a Portuguese consul, Aristides Sousa Mendes, obeying an inner imperative and disobeying Salazar's orders, the Portuguese dictator's orders, issued more than 20,000 visas in a very few days. First in Bordeaux, then in Bayonne, and then on the street at the border with Spain, granting an escape route to more than 25,000 refugees. Many of these refugees queued for days to get their visas, and one of them in Bayonne fainted. He was taken to the room where Aristides Sousa Mendes was issuing the visas and laid on a couch. After recovering his senses, he had not eaten for 3 days. He tried to explain his situation. He was a Czechoslovakian and had a passport of a country that did not exist anymore. Nobody spoke Czechoslovakian. He did not speak French or English. He made himself understood because he spoke German, as did Aristides Sousa Mendes. The persecutor's language got him a visa, saved him. Mastering a second language, sharing a language, plays a central role. There are shared languages that are official languages of countries with populations whose local mother tongues did not gain a written dimension that would make them a vehicle to access all others and give access to other people's culture, to what we are, to our narrative, to others. I would like to use this opportunity to comment on the fact that using different languages is very important and very difficult. When we speak about languages in English, we speak at the same time about mother tongues. We don't say mother languages, we say mother tongues. It's my mother tongue, but it's a language. But if you use the French, you don't distinguish between la langue, the organ you have in the mouth, and la langue, the language you speak. And so the word has exactly these two meanings. The same happens in Portuguese and in Spanish and in Italian. But in German, you have two words that absolutely separate this. It's die Zunge. Canetti wrote the first volume of his biography, autobiography, is Die gerettete Zunge. It is the tongue that has been saved. The tongue, the instrument, the organ. And then you have die Sprache. Man spricht die Sprache. So you speak the language, you language the language. And it is very hard to speak, to control, to master effectively a language and to express yourself in that language. But if you don't master a language, you are not able to think correctly. You are not able to think deeply, to think with precision, to express yourself richly and in a way that is totally enlightening to the others. There are various examples of European languages, of English, Spanish, Portuguese, and French, which are official languages of countries, namely American and African nations and countries that use the same language as their official language and which was exported by many immigrants many years ago. Sometimes they were not exported by immigrants, they were exported just by power, by colonial power, when those countries were seized or those territories were seized by colonial powers. Those countries have frequently multiple local languages, none of which assumed itself as a written language, as an internal uniting vehicle and as a vehicle to access the world and from the world to the populations of those countries. It is difficult to be born in a country and to learn to speak as a mother tongue, a language that has no written expression. I was born in Mozambique. I'm what we say a white African, and I was born in a part of Mozambique where they speak Shop, and Shop is a language that has, I don't know how many words, but the only dictionary that exists between Portuguese and Shop has 800 words, not more than that. So you cannot express yourself with any precision, with any extensive capacity with that language. And you cannot read and write it. There is nothing written in that language. And so in those countries, it is necessary for the official language to become a language of instruction and access to reading and writing. As a vehicle of unity through the access to culture and as a way of access to cultures of other countries. Franz Rosenzweig, a famous German linguist, once said, Sprache ist stärker als Blut. Language is stronger than blood. Through language, you create cultural and sometimes national ties that last forever. James Pitkowski is a Brazilian journalist. He is the son of a Jewish couple born in Poland that emigrated to São Paulo shortly before the Second World War in 1939. One of his nephews, a mechanical engineer, immigrated a few years ago to Israel. He was then 25 years old and was drafted to the Israeli army and sent as commander of a highly fortified jeep of 4 soldiers to occupied Palestine. There, his force of four soldiers was attacked, it's totally relevant for this case, a group of Palestinians, and after a long and aggressive pursuit, isolated one of the Palestinians, first in a street, then in a house, and finally in a room. Very noisy situation with very loud shouts. The Palestinian is cornered and suddenly starts to shout in Portuguese Brazilian, "Shoot, you bastards, kill me once and for all." The Israeli Brazilian commander of the group immediately ordered his men not to shoot and asked the man in front of him how come he spoke Portuguese, Brazilian Portuguese. He was a Palestinian, he was 27 years old, and the grandson of a Palestinian couple who had emigrated to São Paulo after the war in 1947. He also felt he should come back to Palestine. They had never met in São Paulo. Since, they meet every 3 months and set up a group to discuss the reciprocal positions and the situation in the Middle East. They treat each other as brothers. I'm not suggesting that we teach everybody Brazilian Portuguese so that we solve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. But maybe it would be a more efficient solution. In those countries, economic diplomacy, aiding development, should promote networks of elementary schools that teach and write in the official language of those countries, committing itself to the creation of physical and virtual libraries that enable people that learn to read and write in that official language to have access to everything that is available in that language. Here, the European Union has a special responsibility, and it is in its interest, it is convenient not to camouflage this, to allocate resources to teaching those languages so that their globalization becomes a means of unity in those countries, and most of all, of freedom of the people, by giving them access to all that humanity did and does. I would like to tell you that two extensive studies have been done, one in Spain, another in Portugal, about the economic value of language. Spanish economy and Spanish companies are very strong and very important in Latin America, where Spanish is spoken. They are not strong in China. They are not strong in Russia. They are not strong in the United States. They are not strong in Africa. They are strong, and they have flown to the markets where they are strong on the wings of the language, of the Spanish language. Because it allows them to export their manpower, because it allows them to export their manuals, their technical manuals, their instructions, everything. They don't have to learn and to master a different language. They just have to do what they did. And so they can replicate. They can duplicate easily. They can internationalize themselves very easily. This study reported that the relevance, the economic value of the Spanish language for Spain is of 15.6% of the gross domestic product of Spain. This is the economic relevance, because the investments, the economic relations established by Spain with all the countries from Mexico, including to Chile, is most important for the development of the Spanish economy. In Portugal, the value is 17.3%, the economic value of the Portuguese language, due to the relationship with Brazil, to the relationship with Angola, with Mozambique, with the former Portuguese colonies where the Portuguese language is an official language. Language teaching models that enable each person to have access to all that to which, if she had been deprived of, given the language barrier, would impair him, her, reduce her freedom. This should be done, however, without this equality impoverishing him, her, through the loss of the differences which are also the matrix of his, her identity. This is the big challenge of cultural policies on shared languages. Globalizing the sharing of a language should be a means of enabling each person to abolish the differences that debase him or her before others, and as a means of building and preserving the differences that, if abolished, would impoverish him or her before others. So we must use these languages, these multicultural languages that have been fertilized by the contact with other cultures and with other people. We should use those languages, but always use them to abolish differences where those differences have to be abolished so that people have more opportunities, and should not abolish differences where it would impoverish the persons who suffer this abolition of those differences. The policy of teaching shared languages should not signify the repression or suppression of the mother tongues. These are, with all their limitations, starting points of identity for those who, in school or even before, begin to learn language, another language, namely an official language. For this reason, it is necessary to unify orthographies and ensure afterwards that this process of unification is constantly improved, perfected, deepened, always without damaging the creative freedom, always without unnecessary divisions and without impoverishment. Orthography is sometimes very important. Europe would surely not be discussing the possibility of Turkey becoming a member of the European Union had Turkey not adopted the Latin alphabet in the 1920s under Kemal Atatürk. If Turkey still wrote everything in its Arabic writing that it used before 1920, we would not surely be discussing with Turkey the possibility of Turkey joining the European Union. Sharing language, just as I would say you had a polemic in Germany a few years ago about the multiculturalism and the effectiveness of a multicultural policy here. You had the intervention of Sarrazin, the former member of the Deutsche Bank, of the Bundesbank, and probably the problem was misplaced. It was wrongly put. Multicultural policy is most effective and is only effective if it is based on an efficient and successful language policy. If people that come, that immigrate from one country to the other, speak and master absolutely the language of the country to which they come, they absolutely integrate, because they start thinking, they start reasoning on the basis of this language, and they reason exactly the same way the other do. This is why the success of Brazil and of the Brazilian Portuguese as a language. Everybody that goes to Brazil becomes a Brazilian in the sense that they have to learn Portuguese Brazilian. They have to learn Portuguese with the pronunciation and with the verbal complexity of Brazil. That there is no other way. Everybody that immigrates there becomes there. And so if you go to Brazil, you are astonished by the multicultural and the multiculturalism of Brazil. I know a family of 6 Brazilian daughters, girls, that are married to 8 absolutely different men. One is a German Jew, the other is a German, the other is a Japanese, the other is a black Brazilian, the other is a Portuguese, and the other is of Italian origin, a Brazilian of Italian origin. They all meet for Christmas, and they love meeting. I know 2 of them. I love the German and the German Jew. I love these 2, and they tell me it's absolutely unbelievable, but we only speak Brazilian, when we only speak Portuguese as is spoken in Brazilian. We all understand each other perfectly. We all live there, and it abolishes totally, and we think differently when we start thinking in Brazilian and speaking in Portuguese Brazilian. Sharing languages, just as the shared languages themselves, should increasingly become a means of universalization of knowledge and know-how, of greater availability of wealth for whoever uses them, but also of the languages themselves should become more wealthier through their speedy and increasing capacity of meaning and expression, and the simplification of their perfect and varied use through their vocabulary enrichment. As you have already understood, I speak bad English. I don't speak English. I speak 1,500 words English, but it's not my mother tongue. I was not taught since I was a child to speak English. And so it is very hard when you have international discussions, for instance, that you have to have those discussions in a language you don't master. You are discussing a law project. I've done that very frequently. After the Berlin Wall fell, and we were all very eager to help the Eastern European countries to have new economic organizations, new legal organizations for their markets. And suddenly we were together discussing laws in a language that we did not master at all. We were speaking about Slovenian law, but I don't know Slovenian. I was invited to be party of some of the committees that wrote many of those laws. And my problem was always, but I don't know that language. How can I express myself correctly? How can I ensure that what is written there is precisely what should be written there, so that we know what we are editing as a law?